Hello, Brandon. Welcome, welcome.
Hey, good to see you.
Nice seeing you. Thank you for coming at this early hour.
Oh, it's earlier for you than it is for me.
Yep, we are industrious Midwesterners. You know, northern Midwest. You're hailing from the Midwest too. Ohio counts. Where did you grow up?
Indiana.
Indiana. Okay, so you're a Midwesterner through and through. Yeah, I grew up in Ohio, the northeast corner of Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and I still go back there every year to visit family and so forth. So I just want to say welcome from all of us. This is our class. This is a junior level course in that's sort of an intro to political philosophy. We have a great group of students, two of which are majoring in our university's new PPE program. And I know that you run Bowling Green's PPE program. Is that right? Or
no, I don't run it. Kevin Valier runs it.
Okay.
I'm his trusty sidekick.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so that's exciting. And we will be having you later in the year come in person to UMM to talk to us as a guest speaker in our Midwest Philosophy Conference. And we will be relying on your advice on helping to construct our PPE program and, strategies for that. So we appreciate that. I saw, this contribution that is forthcoming, right? So this is like hot off the press.
Yeah, I think the book just came out over the summer, maybe. So it's officially out.
Okay. And I was really impressed with it as a distillation of conservative thought. I'm also using, so this part of we're very early in the semester for anyone who's maybe watching this online later. We're very early in the semester and we're just looking at various political ideologies as often summarized in this book by Haywood called Political Ideologies, which I really recommend. I think it's a really good primer. And so we're just reading through a bunch of political ideologies before we get into some political philosophy that, more polemical. But I just thought you did as good as any job I've ever seen of people, not quite an apology, right, as much of a description of conservatism, especially vis-a-vis libertarianism.
Well, thanks. It's good to see all of you, by the way. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to say a little bit about how the paper came to be or why
Sure.
I'm interested in this topic. So several years ago in grad school, I wouldn't have described myself as a libertarian, but I found so much of libertarianism to be attractive. And I was surrounded by a lot of libertarians, more than you would like meet at the grocery store, right? So it's just like it was a high concentration of libertarians that I knew in grad school, and so I kind of as one does, I wouldn't say I conformed, but things seemed more obvious to me than they do now. And in the last several years, I've come to think that a lot of libertarianism is mistaken. And my friend and colleague, Justin Tosi, got roped into writing this paper. Now, as it turns out, it's very hard to say what conservatism is. There's a famous philosopher, he died a few years ago, Roger Scruton. He was a British conservative political philosopher, and he wrote 3 or 4 books on conservatism. And if you go on YouTube and you look at interviews with him, often the first question is, all right, Sir Roger, what is what is conservatism? And he says something different every time, and he kind of stumbles around. He doesn't really know what So I read a lot of stuff to try to write this little paper, and there's some things that I think I left out that I probably shouldn't have left out. We can talk about that if you want at some point. But really trying to get a handle on when someone says, I'm a conservative, or I'm a conservative person, or I have conservative political leanings. What is the kind of thing that a philosopher could say that could explain what they mean? So I don't think most conservatives, like your everyday conservative on the street, has all these things in their head in this paper when they're saying that they're a conservative. But I think if a philosopher sort of rummaged around in their brain and tried to figure out why they think the way they do, I think these are the kinds of things that we'd find. So it's trying to put sort of, some meat on the bones of some basic conservative things like, tradition's important, and, not changing things too abruptly, that's important. But it's very hard to not just give a list of things. What are these things? How are they supposed to be tied together? What can there be an overarching principle or an overarching assumption that sort of explains all? The beauty of libertarianism is that there's like one principle, right? There's one thing, and then like this is why libertarians publish so much, right? It's just like you got one principle, and then you just like deduce all of the correct views on every topic from that principle. And I don't think you can do that with conservatism for various reasons. And so and many conservatives will disagree with this paper. So I know, for example, George Will, a famous conservative commentator and journalist, he thinks conservatism is just classical liberalism. So it's Adam Smith, it's John Stuart Mill, it's John Locke, it's James Madison. That's all that conservatism is. I wish I found that view attractive because it's very simple, and it could earn you points with all your liberal friends if you just said, look, I'm just a liberal. I'm just an old liberal, but I think that's not quite right. So that's how the paper came to be. That's very kind of you to say that you found it helpful. I'm writing a book on conservatism. So the book will somehow be an expansion of that paper.
Great. We can just leave it up to students to ask some questions, if you don't mind. So anyone want to jump in first? Mutu?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I just kind of wanted to ask a broader question, because you mentioned, you think that there are some things that you left out. And I was wondering, where do you think the religious aspect of conservatism kind of falls in? Because I think that while it might not be present in a lot of theoretical thinking about conservatism, in a lot of people's practice, their religious values inform their conservative political values. And I think it's unique enough and powerful enough that it can't necessarily be incorporated into the ethic of community. So like, where do you think the religious part fits in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mutu, is that how you say your name? Is that right? That's a nice question. So there are, well, let me back up. There are two things that I think I really didn't stress in this paper that I wish I had. One is the conservative preoccupation with virtue. I don't know if we say anything in that paper about virtue. The other is religion, and so I think you're right that this was something that wasn't treated very thoroughly in the paper. There are broadly two kinds of conservatives when it comes to religion, as I see it. There are conservatives who think that religion is one of the most important features of a conservative society, and that it might not even be possible to have a conservative society or conservative polity without people practicing religion. So there's this Jewish political theorist, Yoram Hazony, who he seems to think, at least for like Anglo-American conservatism, it's odd because he's himself a very faithful Jew, but he thinks it's great and wants more Americans to be Christian, and thinks this is one of the foundations of like Western conservatism is Christianity. And so there is this view that like Russell Kirk, who is a famous 20th century conservative, seemed to have a view like this. A lot of Catholics sometimes have a view like this, and sometimes it shades over into other political ideologies that I would not call conservative. The other conservative view that you'll find is a kind of secularist conservatism, where, look, if your traditional culture is religious, there's probably some incredible value in maintaining that. It's going to keep people together. It gives them a source of meaning and value outside of politics. I think this is a really important feature of religion that conservatives often rightly identify, is that if you don't have anything bigger than the state to adore or to have affection for, that's a recipe for disaster. And so the idea is that, for all its faults, religion does often give people a peaceful, meaning-giving way of being human, and that is by worshiping something. And so, if your traditional society, these more secularist conservatives say, if your traditional society has lots of, religious stuff going on, it's probably good to maintain that. But if it doesn't, it's also fine to have a traditional society that doesn't rely on religion. So Michael Oakeshott didn't seem to care much about religion. He's a fairly famous 20th century British political philosopher and often described as a conservative. Some people describe Edmund Burke as a bit of a secularist conservative because he doesn't really talk a lot about religion, doesn't seem to play a huge role in his conservative philosophy. So those are the two options. And I myself find the view that if people don't have a traditionally construed religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism, whatever it is, I'm myself very worried that if you don't have something like that, you will end up with that is a recipe for statism and something like a totalitarian politics, because and I think this is going to be a bit of editorializing here, but I think you do find with a lot of people who don't have a religion or don't have a religious background, politics often fills that hole and takes over every aspect of their lives. And you've probably met people like this, where politics is like all they think about. They wake up every morning and like they want to promote their vision of the good through politics. And I think that is an emaciated view of human flourishing. And I think religion kind of puts a governor on exercising your evolutionarily conferred desires to worship something for whatever reason. It shunts that into something hopefully more productive. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, utopianism, right? I mean, so if, or think about in terms of a natural drive for utopianism, you might think, well, God's going to handle the utopia, or the utopia comes in the hereafter. Utopia is not something that we have to bring about on earth through politics. And of course, you have Marx in a way agreeing, right, from the other direction, saying, religion is the opiate of the masses. It keeps people too pacified. It keeps our politics too stable when it needs to be shaken up and destabilized for the purposes of, social justice. So, I mean, there's agreement there. It may come a shock to some students entering into, political philosophy to hear that religion could make people less aggressive about imposing values rather than more aggressive. But that's a not uncommon take at all, even from the right critics of conservative position.
Right. Of course, a lot hangs on what the religion is telling people to do. I mean, another thing you really can't say out loud too often is not all religions are created equal. And so, if you have a religion telling people to go wage war and take over the world and, impose their view, that would be that would also not be a very conservative view, or it would not be a religion that's conducive to conservatism.
Okay. Any other student question follow-ups on that or some other topic?
I was curious what Mutu, do you have any reactions to anything I just said or Professor Demetrio just said?
I like the, I mean, I like the phrasing that, you know, people who don't really have religion in their lives or perhaps have turned away from religion will turn to politics to fill that void. I've definitely seen that and experienced that a little bit. And I think it's something that perhaps a lot of people in my generation kind of feel. Because, I mean, we are a very kind of activist, politically conscious generation. And perhaps the decline of religion can partially be attributed to as a cause for the rise of political activism in my generation. But yeah, I think you put that very well, that really, you know, some people feel that void of looking to something to kind of drive their life and then their vision for the good. Some people will fill that with politics instead of religion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a recipe. I wouldn't say, not that you were saying this, but you know, just to be clear, I wouldn't want to say if someone wasn't religious, they're going to become a statist, totalitarian, fascist or something, or like, but I do think that, you know, you have to find meaning somewhere. And if you're not finding it in religion, if you're not finding it in politics, so if you're not sort of like going up the hierarchy ladder, maybe you go down, maybe you find it in family or friends or solitude. Maybe that's where you find meaning. And, you know, I think those are probably less destructive ways of finding meaning than national politics. But for whatever reason, there is something, I think, about humanity that wants us to go up the hierarchy ladder. We want to sort of like look up and find meaning instead of looking down.
Great. This leads to a discussion about like institutions, the conservative view about the role of the state, suspicion of the state, but yet they are, in a sense, less suspicious of the state than libertarians are, maybe more suspicious of the state than welfare liberals are. And is there some tension? Katie had some thoughts on this, but like, is there some inconsistency or tension in conservative thought, as you're putting it, between being pro institutions but yet kind of suspicious of the state's role? Maybe you want to elaborate on that, Katie.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit. So like you were saying, Professor, I noticed a little bit of tension between let me pull up my notes, the community kind of being a priority and institutions maybe being not having as many problems, but institutions still being prioritized. One moment, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, specifically on page 3, there was something that said institutions are not the problem here, we are. But then there was also that community focus, but communities are made up of the individuals that are flawed. So I'm just wondering how that all balances out.
Yeah, so Katie, that's a great question, because conservatism is rife, in my view, how I think of it, it's rife with tensions. In fact, I think there is a way of thinking about conservatism where it's a kind of middle position between extremes on all kinds of metrics. And so this is actually, there's a philosopher named John Keeks who taught at University of Albany in New York for many decades. His view is that, in a way, conservatism is just a middle ground on various different sort of metrics. Conservatism is a middle ground between the extremes. So conservatism just moderates, sort of all the way down. It just moderates. And so one of the worries is, okay, so how should we think about the state? The conservative is not anti-state. right? So they're not libertarians, they're not anarchists of maybe a socialist stripe. They do think that the state can be legitimate. They're usually not going to give a grand story about what legitimates the state. Like, why does the state get to push us around? They're typically not going to give a grand story about that. They're often going to side with someone like David Hume, who just thinks like, well, it's been working and people obey it, and that's what legitimates it. You don't have to give a story. It's just sort of like look around you and see how it works, and that's basically good enough. But they're also not. Some people use the term statist to mean anyone who believes that the state can be legitimate. That's not how I like to use the term. A statist is someone who like really gets excited about the machinations of the state. Like, let's, you really want the state to do a lot of stuff. And so I don't like to describe conservative view of the state as small government. I like to think of it as like limited government. So, I mean, because the things that the state should do, I think are, the conservative thinks are limited, but that might mean a bigger government, right? So if you think one thing the state should do is like protect and have a military, that might mean lots of people. So it's not necessarily the size construed in like dollars or counting heads or something. It's what are the proper functions of the state? And the conservative is going to have a modest view of what the state should do and be. They're going to, I think this is one thing that's right about thinking about conservatism in the sense that George Will does, is like there's a modest state. So maybe you think like it enforces laws and contracts, it protects the people, right? You have a defense. Maybe you have like some modest social safety net. Maybe you have public education. After that, we got to talk, right? Now we're getting into some areas where maybe the conservative is not going to be too excited about the state. And for the reasons I think that you were maybe alluding to, which is having to do with skepticism about human reason. And like, do you really want these people sitting in Washington or Minneapolis is the capital, right, of Minnesota? Is that right? Yeah. People.
St. Paul.
St. Paul. Oh, sorry. That's like probably really offensive or something. You don't want the people in St. Paul, like, making decisions about, what time you're going to wake up in the morning or what job you have. So like in Plato's Republic, like the state's like telling you what, like, it's really overwhelming. And so the conservative's not going to want people in power, given our lack of knowledge and given our sort of moral modesty. We're kind of a mixed bag. You don't want people making decisions about all that sort of stuff. Now, the question I think the question you should ask is like, well, if you're skeptical about the state doing that stuff, why should I trust the state to do this other stuff? Have criminal courts, use the military. I mean, aren't these in a way like more dangerous? And I do think that's just, I don't know if I have much more to say than that. That is just a tension in conservatism. And I'll have to find something more to say about that. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's just it's pulling on a lot of things and there's going to be tensions. But I have another follow-up question to that. Based on what you said about when a conservative looks around and sees government and sees things that are working and is okay with that, what about when they look at the government, like I think a lot of modern conservatives are, and they see something that isn't working, something that's incredibly flawed? What happens then?
Yeah. So this is a tough question. So conservatives are known for being biased or defaulting to status quo. If something's good enough, we should be very cautious about something that's working. One thing conservatives often say is things like, things can always get worse. They can always get much worse. And if you want to change things, show me your work. Like, don't just tell me you think it's going to make things better. Don't tell me you have good intentions. show me your work. Now, I don't know what that would be. Like maybe it's worked in some other society that's similar to ours, or, you know, we have really good reason to think that actually this change will make things better. You know, Burke famously said that in order to conserve, you often have to reform. So reform is often necessary to preserve the good things you have. So I think those are maybe the kinds of situations where you have in mind, where you know, we have this thing that we really want to preserve. Maybe it's like the integrity of the family, and our state or national politics have not done their duty in preserving that thing, the family. So maybe we need to reform various laws, maybe give more tax breaks to families with kids or something to incentivize having babies or something. That might be a reform that is aimed at conserving the good thing that we have. But there's very little in conservative thought. You know, there's just not a lot written about the theory of change. When do you change a law? How much do you need to know? The one thing that conservatives will say is that most changes should be incremental and take place over like the span of a glacial period, right? So and the reason for that is so that you can get feedback, right? So that you can sort of like test what's happening and see if you're getting the desired effects. Now the problem is some changes can't be incremental, right? It's either you do it or you don't. And anything incremental might actually make things worse too. So yeah, I mean, I think the conservatives just going to say, often they'll just say, yeah, we just don't know a lot. That's the human condition. Like Oakeshott says, we are all on a raft floating in the ocean. There's no shore in sight. There's no map, right? We're just on this rock floating around. And like, we want to plan the entire, you know, we want to like plan everything and like set everything up. And I think one thing the conservative rightly notes, in my view, is that there's just a lot that humans can't know and can't do. And those who think that humans can know and do a lot more, it's incumbent upon them to sort of like show their work and prove that. But this is why conservatives get seen as grumpy and, you know, they don't want to change. You know, it's just like they I think rightly they sometimes are criticized for being too afraid of change.
Just to jump in here, I mean, since we're talking to young people here, who are smart, who are all philosophical, are conservatives just stuck with this? You know, just fated to be the natural opponents of young people who are, you know, more adaptive, more inclined to change than old people are, who are also highly theoretical. I mean, what a position to be in for an ideology, to be naturally sort of repugnant to intelligent people who incline towards systematizing and trying to make sense of things, and curious and creative, and then be naturally opposed to those people, naturally inclined to alienate those people who are inevitably going to rise up to the highest. I mean, unless there's some very strict force keeping them down, rise up to the highest sort of levels in the next generations of government and institutions.
Yeah, the conservative is not going to ever be cool, I don't think, unless it's like cool in a punk rock way, maybe at some point, but like not like, I mean, the conservative is often saying, no, we're not doing that. No, we don't know that. No, that's too quick. And that's not, that isn't attractive to a lot of people, not just young people. Some people think of conservatism as a view that recognizes limits. So a mutual friend of ours David McPherson is a professor at Creighton, and he has a recent book called The Virtues of Limits. And this is his view of conservatism. Basically, is that conservatism is a way of life that recognizes the limits. There are moral limits, there are economic limits, there are existential limits to being a human. And the idea is that the conservative is the person better placed to recognize those limits and make decisions in light of those limits. And so, yeah, like if you're, I don't have kids, I don't have teenagers, but like I imagine telling a 16-year-old, like, here's a way of life, right? There's lots of limits. That's not often going to be very attractive. So it's possible that you're right, that there is that conservatism, except for maybe in enclaves of small communities like the Amish or something, like where young people don't have other options. They don't, it's all they know are limits. It might be that in a liberal society, conservatives are just always going to be the naysayers and the grumps. And I'm actually okay with that. I actually like playing that role. Kind of like dropping turds in punch bowls. So.
Right. I know Mutsu had a comment. Maybe you were going to follow up on that.
Yeah. I was just wondering, that was a really good question. And it kind of makes me think of a question that I have often is that, are we all just bound to get more and more conservative as we get older? Like I feel it myself and I'm only like 17, and I'm like, is this just going to keep moving more conservative as I get older? So that's kind of my question.
I think that's probably right. I think everyone is conservative about what they know best and what they love. So the things that you know best, the things that you love, you're going to be conservative. You're going to want to protect and preserve those things. And because you love them, you're going to want other people to love those things too. So this is why your parents want you to get into some TV show from the 80s, right? Or they want you to listen to some, rock music from the 70s. They love these things and they want you to love them. And you may not love them, but you may come around to love them later. And you might come around to love them because your parents love them. You might, at age 35 or 40, you might think, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't, I hated the Beatles or something. But now I see like what they were talking. I see why there was value in this. And you might even love it because your parents loved it. It's a way to feel close to them or something, is to listen to the Beatles. So I do think as you get older, there's just things that you know more, like you know more about it because you've had more time, and you love it more because you've had more time to be with it and to love it. And I think the older you get, the more things you know and love, the more conservative you're going to be about those things. So I think that's quite right. It would be weird, I think, just as a matter of like human psychology, if young people tended to be more conservative, just because they haven't lived as long. I mean, that's it. Like, it would require a very different human psychology because we do get attached to things. I mean, there's an entire psychological literature on like attachment, and we get attached to places, we get attached to things, to people. And the longer that you stay in a place or with a person, you become attached to it. It's just a psychological phenomenon. And so it would be weird for younger people to be more conservative. So, yeah.
Yeah, Katie.
So earlier you mentioned, I think you very briefly mentioned the analogy of a raft in the middle of an ocean with nothing on any side. We don't know anything. We don't know where anything is. And you might have two groups of people on that raft, some who are newer, so they just swam up and they're new to the raft. And some people really, really love that raft and they've been there for years. To not try to go any direction just because you like the raft, that doesn't seem like very good reasoning. So it makes sense that you might be more conservative, but to oppose change and to oppose the people that want to say build a sail or start paddling in any direction, that doesn't seem like it's quite intuitive.
I think you're right. I think to tell the new person on the raft or the young person on the raft, no, we're not doing that. You have to have a reason, right? So it may be, look, we've been trying to build rafts for 2,000 years. And every time we build a sail, the wind takes it down the next day. So you can go waste your time doing that, but it's not going to last. So if that was the explanation, and someone still said, no, we still want to try, I think that's when the status quo reasoning carries weight, is when there is some explanation for why we aren't going to do that or why we're not going to try again. I think just to say, no, we're not going to do that does require some further explanation. The raft analogy that Oakeshott gives is, in my view, what he's trying to get at is all political theorizing has to start from the present. So one thing that bothers me about a lot of political ideologies is either obsessed with how to recreate a society, or like how to like start things from scratch. Like libertarians often talk like this, like, well, like a long time ago before states, we were just individuals and we had freedom, and like, let's go back to that. Or they want to go, they want to go to somewhere. So Marx wants to get to somewhere. Libertarians want to get somewhere. They have a goal in mind. And I think one thing that Oakeshott and many conservatives will stress is that really isn't the most important question before us. The most important question before us is like, where are we now? Where are we now? What problems do we have now? And can we solve any of those problems? And is it feasible to solve those problems? And I often get frustrated with a lot of philosophers because it's like field of dreams, like political philosophy. It's like, if you build it, they will. Like, if we just like had a theory, or if we just like tried harder, we can get to some goal in mind about. I'm imagining it. Like, I'm imagining this thing that we're trying to get to. And if we just put our heads together, often you'll hear politicians say, we can do this. We just don't have the will. Right? Enough people don't agree with me that we should do this. If more people agree with me that we should do this, we could do it. Maybe. But I think conservatism is sort of like, it's a political philosophy that is primarily concerned with the present. It's not concerned with the past, or like bringing back some idealized version of the past. It's not concerned with trying to get to some end state goal, getting rid of the state and so on, because it's not going to happen overnight. Like, we're not getting rid of the state tomorrow. It's not happening next month, right? It's not happening probably in any of our lifetimes. And so, like, once you realize that, like, why am I spending so much time thinking about anarchism? Like, we're not getting there. Like, that's not on the table. What is on the table is like where we live now, the problems that we actually have, and the questions before us. And so I think that's really what that raft analogy is trying to get at. I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm not asking if you agree, but does that make sense?
It does make sense. Thank you.
Jumping off that, I mean, I wonder if you could, so, I mean, think of like political utopianism as a telic. You were aiming for something, but technology is a bit of a pushing force, not a seeking force, but a pushing force that forces us to change and evaluate constantly. And as does, I think, threats from outside. I guess I'm thinking about like Things Fall Apart, that great novel by Chebe, right? You have this deeply conservative character whose world is just thrown in tumult because of the arrival of things like white colonizers and guns and Christianity. And so outside threat, technology. And it seems like technology, of course, is accelerating, and major technological shocks like birth control pills and things like that nuclear weapons. Things like this seem to force us to develop theories, right, about why we should or should not do something. No more can we just not ignore it because we don't have the power to do X. Now we do have the power to do X, so now we need to think about, should we do X, or gene editing technology. So we never have to worry, so I was talking to the students before you came that one way to think about a conservative, political conservative, is much like being a conservationist in the ecological realm, right? We're not going to get rid of mosquitoes, although we may be on the verge of being able to get rid of mosquitoes. and you can't quite say why. It's not clear that we really do need mosquitoes. Life would be great if it were sustainable without mosquitoes, but they're probably useful for something that we don't know yet. And, nature's a lot more complicated than our models of it. And so we should probably leave the mosquitoes as they are. And conservatives are like this to, the social realm, but, you have to, once you have the ability to make a big social change with technology, it's, then it's the reformer that wants to say to you, show me your work. We could get rid of the mosquitoes, show it and save millions of lives. Show me where we need the mosquito. And if you can't, I'm going to assume that you just are talking out of your butt, and, we're going to change it. Or we have the pill now, we could control, we could have sex without children. Show me why we shouldn't use that. And it's like, well, I don't know yet. It's only been around for a year, and so forth. So, show me why people would have, show me how this could possibly affect the family or something like that, right? And they'll be very skeptical. Why would this lead to more out of wedlock kids when it's the pill keeping you from having kids? That sounds crazy, right? Show me why that would happen. And the conservative in the 60s is unable to maybe explain how it actually will lead to more out of wedlock children, right? So, but so does technology, the rapid pace of technological innovation, make it hard to be a conservative? Because to be conservative is to sort of say, look, I don't have the answers. It's anti-theoretical, anti-rationalist, and so forth. You have to have the answers. You have to have an ideology. You have to have a theory of how everything works and fits together.
Yeah, that's really nice. It occurs to me, I don't know if that thought has occurred to me before, namely that conservatives are at a steep rhetorical disadvantage. If they're being, if they're skeptical, right? Because they're like, well, I don't know. Like, you want me to crack open the ecology of society and tell me what's going to happen. Now, my view is, as a conservative, the conservative says, I don't know what's going to happen. Politicians aren't going to win saying that, right? You cannot win in a democracy saying, I don't know, we're all kind of stupid and we're all kind of mediocre morally. And so we're just going to kind of slug along. And that's not rhetorically interesting, or it's not going to motivate people to vote for you. And so if you say, no, I've assembled this team of economists. They're standing behind me right now. There's 100 of them. And they all say, if we do this, right, it'll have this effects. It won't have these bad effects. That's gonna win the day. 9 times out of 10, that's gonna win. And so, does that show that conservatives are wrong? Now, the challenge of technology is that, and this is I've always thought this was a challenge to Hayek in his criticisms of socialism. So Hayek thought that socialism has a knowledge problem. Like, you can't do better than markets and prices at giving people information about how much stuff is available and what's in demand and so on. But I've always thought, what if there was a supercomputer that could do all that stuff? What if Google or Amazon figures out how to now this would be extremely invasive into your life. You'd have to know how many bananas are in your house right now. Okay. But if the technology was there to do that, does that mean that we should be should we be socialist? Does that overcome this objection to socialism that, as economists have been convinced by for 70 years now? There are these conservatives who are just anti-technology. Wendell Berry, I don't know if he would call himself a conservative, but Wendell Berry, has been railing against modern agriculture for 40 years. It's destroyed the local farm. It's destroyed a way of life. Now, of course, the counter is, yeah, but we've lifted 1 billion people out of destitution and poverty because of modern farming and agriculture. So I often do worry that conservatives are just they are too wedded to their ways of life, when there are these things that we maybe could be doing that lift people out of destitution and poverty.
Go ahead.
So with the farming, would it be a conservative take to say, oh, we should go back to old ways of farming, no more modern agriculture? Or would it be a conservative take to say, well, we should keep doing this because it's working, even though modern farming is going to end up destroying a lot environmentally?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll answer it by making a distinction. So there are some conservatives that are much more eager to go back to how things were. Sometimes these get called reactionary conservatives. I'm not sure. Everyone's reacting to something. I don't think that term is all that apt. But there's this French sort of philosopher and statesman, de Maistre, and after the French Revolution, and he wanted to go back to the king, reinstate the Bourbons or whatever, and so there is this tradition of we need to go back, to the 50s. Okay, that was when things were really good, right? Or we need to go back to the 80s. That was when things were really good, and then the challenge is well, how do we get back there? That is a kind of recapturing the past. I think that is a kind of conservative view. The other conservative view is well, we shouldn't go back to the past just because it was the past, or just because things were good enough or good back then along some measure. And so I think maybe someone like Wendell Berry, or a cartoon version of Wendell Berry, might say, yeah, maybe we should stop with the certain kinds of farming. Maybe we shouldn't use all these chemicals, and maybe we should, I don't know exactly what all of his criticisms are, but maybe we should sort of go back and sort of find something that we lost, which every conservative is open to. I think everyone's open to finding something that was valuable that was lost. But then I think these more maybe present-oriented conservatives will say, well, no, look, no one's saying that modern agriculture is the best thing that's ever happened, and there's no problems with it, and no one's been harmed by it. But look at all the amazing good things that it did. It really has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty and destitution. In America today, it's really hard to be absolutely poor. It's very hard. And especially if you graduate from high school, don't have a kid before you're 25, there's various simple things you can do that, basically food is not going to be your problem. And I think the conservatives should say, yeah, that was good. On balance, it was good.
Just piggyback on this. Could you just allude to it briefly in your discussion of conservatism versus libertarianism, but can you talk more about markets and the conservative? Is there any in your analysis of autonomous conservatism, or just a substantive conservatism, are there any general contours of where the conservative and the libertarian are going to part ways over free trade, globalization, open borders, multinational corporations, anything like that?
This is a really hard topic for conservatives, I think. I think conservatives should give 2 cheers for capitalism or free markets. I don't think it's an unreserved praise. So in that, I think they will depart from the libertarian. I think that conservatives should be in favor of free markets. I mean, I think that's probably at this point among conservatives pretty unquestioned. There is this book. I mean, there are conservatives who are anti-capitalist. There's a book called, what's it called? I think it's just called Conservatives Against Capitalism, and it's sort of a historical survey of the various conservatives throughout history that have been against capitalism. I think that view is kind of gone by the wayside. You'll still find some conservatives who are very critical of capitalism for various reasons, but overall, I think, in the mid 20th century, conservatives got wedded to the libertarians for political reasons to fight communism. And those are called fusionists. So you'll often see the term fusionist to describe people who basically want social conservative. This is a cartoon version, but they want social conservatism, but they want like all the goodies of free markets and capitalism and so on. And so there's a kind of a wedding of traditionalist values with libertarian economics. There's a big debate about whether this actually is possible, whether it's been good for conservatism or libertarianism, whether it's been good for, say, the US. I think Reagan and Thatcher are often seen as like the archetypal sort of fusionists. So I think that as a matter of personal liberty, as a matter of feeding human mouths, right? I think meeting basic human needs, I think societies should have free markets. I think the conservative should say something in that vein. But I also think the conservative will be more inclined to put limits on markets than the libertarian. So if there was an economic decision that's or an economic policy decision that severely disadvantaged the state. So a lot of conservatives think that what the state should be doing is keeping itself afloat, right? You want to keep the state going. If there was a policy that prevented the state from keeping itself going in terms that people would understand themselves, so maybe the state would exist, but like it would be massively different in various cultural or religious ways, then that would be a reason to not pursue that economic policy.
So you mean the state in the sense of the nation, not the state in the sense of the government. You mean the nation, the people, or something like that?
Well, I guess I'm thinking of both, right? So so if, you could imagine, I mean, let's just talk about immigration. You can imagine a massive influx of illiberal immigrants, right? So, this very day, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, if they could get a visa, would fly to the US and immigrate here. Okay. And so that would change the national character, presumably. And it would also presumably downstream change the character of the state. You can imagine constitutional amendments. You can imagine, getting rid of various kinds of federal laws against this or that, or, use your imagination. And you could change the character of the state in that way too. So if there were, one of the things that has started to make me think that libertarianism could not be correct was its view on open borders. I don't win points by saying this. No one wins points by saying this in academia, but I do not understand what, and some of them are my very close friends, but I do not understand what open borders advocates, I don't know what world they think we live in. And this is one of those things where the libertarian is just going to insist on the priority of individual liberty. That is the most important value. It trumps everything else. And so if someone wants to move here to work, who among us has a right to say they can't do that? And, I think conservatives, because they care about there's other values at stake, and no one of those values trumps every other one all the time, that there are other things that matter. And so, if you think of immigration as fundamentally an economic issue, which, maybe that's the way to think of it, why should I not be able to hire someone from some other country and just come work in my business? No questions asked. Then, I lost my train of thought. I looked at the chat box. That was the problem.
Oh, sorry. But yeah, Katie asks a good question.
Yeah.
What values do you think would be threatened by immigration? Is that fair, Katie? Like what?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is something in the neighborhood of self-determination. And I think it's okay for people to get together who have a way of life. Maybe it's they have certain cultural values, maybe certain religious values. I think it's okay for them to say, we want to have a certain kind of life here. And if you don't want to live that kind of life, that's okay. But this isn't the place for you. And so, like my view is, think back to like ancient human tribes or whatever. Like, this is our hill, right? We live on this hill and we worship this God and we practice, we do these things. And like, another tribe comes over some other hill and wants to live on our hill. It seems to me that the people who were living on that hill and had the way of life said, no, you can't come here. So I think a kind of cultural self-determination. And I think that is a fundamental, I don't know if I call it a right, but I think societies have a right to self-propagate and follow their own traditions and do their own things, just like it would be wrong for millions of, progressive Hollywood elites to like move to, I don't know, some conservative country and just like take over and buy all the land and like, change the government. I think they have a right to prevent that from happening.
Nate, you wanted to jump in?
I was going to change the subject, so maybe wait till this thread is done.
Mutu, did you have follow up on this one? Okay.
I did, yeah. I just wanted to kind of make the kind of follow-up point that, it's not like everybody wants to come to America either. Like not everyone sees the individualism and the excessive opportunity and thinks that's for me. Like, some people just want to stay home in their conservative communities. I mean, like, that's what my parents were like. Yeah. So I did like that, I wanted to make that point that like the values of a society do affect who it attracts around the world.
That's right. I mean, interesting fact about libertarianism is libertarians don't want you to live in a non-libertarian society. I mean, this is a kind of internal contradiction or conflict in libertarianism. I mean, they love freedom, but you're not free to be non-libertarian, right? You're not free to create a non-libertarian society. And that I'm sure they have some clever response to this, but I just can't understand what it would mean to value liberty and freedom and then say, no, if you want to live this certain way with like-minded people, you aren't allowed to. That's always seemed to be a bit of a magic trick that they pull.
This is just a jump in real quick before we get to Katie, who I think also wants to continue this theme. We only have 10 minutes left, right, guys? We have 10 minutes left. There's this paradox of who are the real friends of diversity? I think it's an open question whether diversity is good at all, of course, but I do actually like diversity. I like the strange and weird. I like, diversity. And I think most of us do like a rich world, with a lot of richness, and much of richness has to do with diversity. But I know a lot of students are shocked to hear that conservatives often feel that they are the true champions of diversity, even though part of or a very common position among conservatives is going to be excluding and keeping people out. So from your particular place. So do you have any thoughts on that, or like, do you agree with that? Do you like, what's going on?
Yeah, so I think I agree that conservatives have the right take on diversity. So you can think of diversity, or you can think of the conservative view as a kind of middle way, and this is John Keeks's view, between sort of absolutism, where you know, top down, you have the right moral view, you have the right values, you got the right ranking of the values, freedom is first or equality is first, and you just impose that from the top down. That's a kind of absolutist view. It's very hard to get diversity that way. You can also have a relativist view where there really are no universal moral values or codes. Anything goes. You know, if your society wants to do some crazy stuff like that's pretty abhorrent, like, well, whatever, you know. I think the conservative has a middle ground, which is to say that there are basic fundamental human rights or goods that everyone shares. But beyond that, people should be allowed to develop their own traditions and pursue their own visions of the good life. And even within, like, you know, like this, like the US, like there should be the Amish, like the Amish, if they want to live a certain way, you know, they should be able to do that. You know, and you know, one weird thing, you know, nationalism is kind of a dirty word now, but if you think of nationalism as a way of promoting diversity, I think it's easier to see the benefits of it, where, you know, like not every country needs to be libertarian utopia. If you like diversity, it's good for there to be Nigeria and Portugal and Hong Kong. Like these are all, you know, very different kinds of societies. And that's only possible, in my view, if you sort of allow nations to do their own thing and don't try to impose, you know, for most of us, it would be impose progressive Western views on all of these, you know, colonialism, right? It's like, if colonialism is bad, it's bad, right? It's not just bad like 200 years ago. It would be bad now too, to try to impose these views on more traditional societies or societies that have their own traditions. I don't know if that's what you were going for, Professor Demetrio, but yeah, I think that kind of diversity, because of the emphasis on tradition, I think diversity, certain forms of diversity can find a welcoming home in conservatism.
Nate or Katie, I know both of you. Nate, we haven't heard from you today, so maybe we could get to you first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so something that I think is kind of like interesting about conservatives is so like I think that they're right to point out kind of like you know, the limits of humans, right? And like the actual amount of work that needs to go into creating a good, solid solution we can implement. However, it doesn't seem like they put any more work into solutions than their counterparts. In fact, it seems like they expend all their energy just being like, hey, you know, you can't do that. Like, instead of actually trying to come up with solutions, they tell people that their solutions are bad. And I think that that's probably like just one of the main problems with conservatives is like, it's not a problem with the conservative position. It's more so a problem with the practitioners of conservatism. And I think that that's one of like the primary inhibitors of it.
Good. So I appreciate that. I think there are two ways, Nate, of thinking about conservative action in politics. So what should conservatives be doing in politics? One is maybe what you're suggesting, which is like, okay, well, you don't like what the progressives are doing. Well, give me something else. Like, give me an alternative. And on that view, you know, conservatives in politics should be actively promoting their own positive views and their own positive vision of society. I don't think that's the only way to go about being a conservative in politics, because I do think that there is some honor in being the force in society that just says no. Now, is that inspiring? No. Is that going to solve a problem? Maybe not, but it might prevent problems. And so I do sometimes think that like conservatives are sort of like the they're like the gate, you know, they're like the gate that says, no, we're not going to do that. Do you have a better solution? No, I don't. But I don't need to have a better solution to know that this is not a good solution. And again, that is unsatisfying. If you're solutions oriented in politics, that's going to be unsatisfying. But I think what a lot of conservatives would say is, be that as it may, there is political and social benefit to being the party of no, or being a community of no that says, no, we're going to slow down, and we're not going to just do this because everyone's excited about it. That's not how you make decisions. But I agree, you know, look, I agree with you, Nate, that on the whole, a lot of people who at least call themselves conservatives in politics should probably be more active in promoting things that they care about. I think that's probably right. Even if it's just to win elections, right? So you might need to throw out some plans there just to sort of get elected. And then you can be, you know, if you want to be the do nothing party, or the do nothing. The thing about politics that sort of drives a lot of conservatives nuts is like you got to do something. I don't know, maybe not, like, I don't know. That's not inspiring though, is it, Nate?
I don't know. Like, so I think that, like, okay, you know, maybe there is some merit to just being like the force that says no, but you know, you wouldn't want that party, you know, that no party, to just become like the dominant political force in a country, because then everything just grinds to a halt and then nothing happens, right? It's like, yeah, it's good to have somebody to, you know, be that gate, but you know, it seems like it's too many people kind of join that group, then it becomes more of a wall.
Yeah, so this is a nice point, and this is an argument that has been made by professional philosophers that you've stumbled upon, which is that political diversity is good. It would be bad for a society to just be all conservatives. And that's kind of paradoxical. You might think, well, if this is the right view, then why shouldn't everyone hold it? And I agree. It feels weird to me to say it, but so Jerry Gauss, for example, in his most recent book before he died, argued that no, you need, let's just say, progressives and conservatives in the same society, because you will have a better society if you have these opposing forces. Political diversity is good. Not everyone should be progressive. Not everyone should be conservative. No, that raises all kinds of interesting questions about what the purpose of political ideology is. You know, is it about finding truth, or is it just about sort of solving problems in a polity so that we have these competing forces to sort of like mitigate each other's, you know, excesses or deficiencies? But I have to say that I am persuaded by that view, which is that I would think about it more, but I'm not sure I'd want to live in a society of all naysayers and conservatives. Now, of course, that's not fair to the conservative, because, you know, as Burke points out, to preserve, you do have to, you know, reform. So there will be some reforms. But you're right that if everyone was just saying no all the time, maybe that would be bad.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, something that I find interesting is like I hold all the same values as my progressive friends, and I feel like I want to get to the same place that they do. But like, I feel like I'm a conservative with like progressive values. Like, is that like like contradictory, do you think, or is that like an actual like valid position to hold? Like,
what are you conservative about?
Well, just I see all of these solutions being proposed for how to get to like equality and yada yada yada, and it's like, okay, yeah, like I really want to get there too, but I'm just so often like unsatisfied with the reasoning that I see, and I don't think that, you know, enough time has been put into it, and it all seems sort of like like haphazard and in just, it doesn't have like the hallmarks of well put together ideas. And like, I guess that's like what concerns me is like, it's like, yeah, I want the same thing that you want, but I don't think that, you're going about this like the right way. I don't think that you're putting enough time into it. I don't think that you're really thinking things through properly, so like in that sort of sense, I like am operating like as a conservative.
Yeah, so maybe you're it sounds like, to caricature you, maybe you're progressive in your vision, progressive in your goals, but less progressive, or maybe more conservative in your methodology. Of course, it's unfair to saddle progressives with just like knee-jerk reactions. I mean, I think that's probably unfair, but I think
that would be unfair.
But it tends to be the conservative who says, let's hold on off that, or show me your work. That is a more conservative disposition, which is why people often say conservatism is a disposition. It's a cast of mind. It's an impulse. It's a way of being in the world. It's not a politics. It's not a political ideology. It's a so I mean, this is what Oakeshot's paper is about on conservatism, on being conservative. It's a kind of way of approaching life as an individual. And so in that sense, you could have a conservative cast of mind in some respects, but maybe still want to aim at certain progressive goals. I think that's great. I would prefer that kind of progressive, I would say.
Good. I think that's a great place to end it. We do have to end it. We're 2 minutes over time and my students have to run to some other classes. But Dr. Warmke, thank you so much for coming. I know there are more questions, and I'm happy to say that these students will be sitting across from you at dinners and lunches in the spring, and we'll have more opportunity to pick your brain about this topic and others. Thanks so much for coming. This has been a great class. We owe you one.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being so kind and all your great questions. And hopefully I'll see you all in the spring. Yeah, have a good semester. You're very lucky to have Professor Demetrio. He is, and I'm very serious. He is, he's one of the people that I actually think is one of the most intellectually curious and open-minded people in the entire profession. So and I'm not just saying that. He didn't pay me.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll go on. Maybe we don't need to cut things short after all. Maybe we could go on for a few more minutes. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again, everyone, and see you guys on Thursday. Bye-bye.